Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today. The title of today's webinar is Dynamic Data Masking in Oracle EBS. Our presenter today is Greg Wendt, who will introduce himself in just a moment. My name is Stephanie Anderson. I'm the Global Webinar Manager here at Pathlock. But before we go any further, I'd like to just cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any audio issues during this webinar, click on Preferences and then Audio. From there, you can check to see if you are using the appropriate audio device. You can also click on the play sound to check if you can hear the sound coming from your speakers. This presentation will take approximately 45 minutes. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation, so please type any questions into the Q&A box for our speaker to answer at the end of the event. To prevent background noise, everyone is on mute. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Greg.
Thanks, Stephanie. So yes, as she said, my name is Greg Wendt. I'm an executive director here for the security solutions at Pathlock. I've got about 20 plus years. I started with ERP systems back in the late 90s when everybody was trying to get off of the mainframes. I've also dealt with a lot of large implementations. I worked oil and gas, retail, and higher ed before joining the team about 8.5 years ago. So from an agenda perspective, what we're going to be talking about today is really the significance of data masking in Oracle EBS. Also, how does that help us address ERP risks with data masking? You know, what are some of the pros, some of the cons of that? Implementing data masking controls. We'll also demo that, have some points to remember, and Q&A. And just like Stephanie said, if you've got any questions, just go ahead and submit them via the GoToWebinar control panel that's normally on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll try to keep an eye on those as we're going through the session. So if some of them pop up, I'll try to address as we're going through. So a little bit about Pathlock. Who we are is the market leading controls automation platform. So you can see some of our customers that we work with there, as well as some of our partners. Additionally, you can see we have over 500 employees now worldwide, and it's really been a change of merging of a lot of different organizations coming together. I was on the Apsian side before, and we're now part of Pathlock. So you can see from the growth of a lot of these companies, we are now one of the larger security companies out there that focus in the ERP market for one, but it's many different areas that are now combined into one. So Greyheller Apsian started in 2005, Q Software started in 2000, SAST started in 2005, Security Weaver in 2005, Expandian in 2007, Pathlock in 2006, CSI Tools were in 1997. So you can see a lot of these are organizations that have been around for many, many years. So a lot of the things that we're talking about bringing to the market are solutions that have been in use with, you know, thousands of customers basically. So we, a combined group, we have over, I want to say 1,300 customers. So it really allows us to touch base in many different applications that we hadn't before. So we can focus on cross-application SOD style violations, for example, user lifecycle management, security, audit, SODs, efficiencies, and we can do that as a worldwide leader of automation. So that's who we are now with Pathlock, and being able to touch base with all of these different applications has really given us a large advantage in the marketplace today. So let's jump in and talk a little bit of why is data masking important? And this is really, you know, with all of the different organizations and really ERP systems as a whole, this is important across your ERP systems, whether it's EBS, whether it's PeopleSoft, whether it's SAP, for example. It allows you, because these ERP systems really were designed to consolidate and make your applications very consistent. It was supposed to bring in efficiencies across your organization because you were utilizing the same tool set, the same application set, which really allowed you to, one, share data and have those consistencies. And what that does, though, is it really makes data replicate all over. So you may be working with HCM, you could be in financials, you could be doing inventory, you can be doing customer service. All of these different application sets can contain sensitive information, for example, and there's hundreds of transactions and thousands of fields inside of this system. So it really is something that you have to understand. The sensitive data is really spread across a huge surface inside of these ERP systems. And EBS isn't any different than any of the rest of them when it comes to that. It's a challenge that all of them have. And it's because of the way they were designed. They were designed to process large sums of data efficiently. They weren't necessarily designed with some of the compliance challenges that we have today. For example, something like GDPR, where we need to understand who's accessing data and protect data in certain scenarios. And that really brings us into some of those data privacy requirements, because the focus has to be, when you look at the security models that are out there, you really need to focus on the data. It's a shift in a mindset. You've got to understand what data you have, who's utilizing that data, where is that data exposed, how frequently might it be exposed, should it be exposed, are you implementing least privileged access, for example, to where you're going to minimize what somebody is able to see and protect that data when they don't need to work with it. All of those things come into the data privacy requirements, because as your users work with the systems, depending upon how they access that transaction and what data is exposed to them, is going to mean different requirements on your auditing side, for example, and how you need to track and report on that. Because if data was exposed or not, really can help alleviate some of the pains of those requirements and what you need to track. Also, the user-centric threats. Everybody's, basically, just look at your own inbox and you'll see it. The targeted spear phishing attempts that come in, the phishing attempts, regardless what you try to do to stop them, they're still getting through. It used to be when accounts were compromised, they would just immediately go after sending huge swaths of emails to entire organizations. Well, that didn't really work very well. It wasn't efficient, and basically because there were so many that came in at the same time, everybody just noticed it. When you talk about bad actors, one of the things they want to do is be very quiet. They don't want to make a lot of noise in the organization, which is one of the reasons why they've switched to such user-centric threats, because they can focus on 1 to 2 to 3, maybe 4 individuals, rather than so many people in the organization at one time. So it allows, it makes people feel like that was meant for them. So now all of a sudden it's like, oh, that email is really meant for me, and I need to actually go do this because, Jimmy or Paul sitting next to me didn't get that email. So this is mine. I need to go do this. So that's why they're successful, with being able to do these. You can watch, for example, like the Verizon data breach report, and how this has gone up and down over the years. So, but your end users are going to be targeted. It's going to be consistent, and it's going to stay that way for quite some time. I don't see that changing anytime soon in the near future. Another issue is data exfiltration. What happens when data leaves your organization? It's dangerous, especially with post-COVID, with people working from home. Where's that data going? How are you going to control it? What's going to happen to it? Is it going to be exposed? Is it on a shared computer at home where, the kid's also using that to do some classes and things like that? So a lot of issues around those user-centric threats. And then also espionage, stealing secrets inside of the organization itself. When we talk about implicit data protection, it's really no longer enough. And when you think about the traditional access controls, they really stop at that transactional level. When you look and understand a role-based access system, it basically says, here are my users, here are my processes or my transactions, and these are what they're going to be able to do. This is what this role allows them to function and do. It doesn't necessarily tie into the data of what is inside of that role or what's inside of that transaction and what that user is doing inside of the system, should they be touching that data. So that's where that limited protection of data within the transaction really comes in, because it allows you, the transaction is designed to show the data to that user because they're going to need that data to function and do whatever they need to do from a business process procedure. Could be financials, could be HR, could be PII, whatever the data is. It's just designed to give them that data, work with it, and then they go on. When you start thinking about some of the different compliance challenges and reporting issues that are often out there, that's really where you kind of have that shift of that minimalization of what data somebody should be able to work with, or least privileged. Because if you don't expose the data, now it's much easier on you as an organization, especially if it's unnecessary. Does that user need access to the data? Maybe it's a PII of national ID, social security number. Do they have to be able to see that all the time? Maybe they only need to see it part of the time, but it's on the transaction. I don't want to customize the code because then that's going to increase my carrying cost and those types of things. So I want the ability to go in, mask the data that's important for me, and not have to update or change my system. So it really becomes difficult to do that out of the box. And that's where the data level protection has its challenges. Is the data masking out of the box is very limited or challenging, so you're going to have to go in and build the customizations. Then anytime that you put in customizations, it's going to increase your total cost of ownership, and it's also going to limit how widely you're going to adopt that, because going back to the setup of the ERP system, how broad and where is that data accessed, and who's able to look at it. So do I want to touch all of those transactions? Do I need to? Do I want, I don't even want to do that most of the time. So it becomes very challenging for static access control enforcements like role-based access controls to actually really be effective in protecting that data inside of the application, because it's designed for those transactions, not the data elements inside of it. So how do we make Oracle EBS masking made easy, for example? It's something that it has to be configurable, and it has to be extendable. It's got to be something that doesn't change or modify your existing system. And what we've done, we've actually done this in the PeopleSoft system, we've done this in SAP, and now we're doing this in EBS as well. So we've done this in other ERP systems. So we have a simple configuration that allows you to be able to do that. So the Pathlog platform extends data masking capabilities into Oracle EBS with fine-grained and contextual controls over the enforcement. So that's really some of the advantage. And how we do that is through a policy engine. So the policy engine allows you to build in certain controls around how that masking is going to be done, for example. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail here. So when you're talking about how to deploy this, it can be easily deployed because of the policy engine that sits inside of the EBS system. So it allows you to configure that. So the masking rules are going to be configured at that layer. So you're not having to go in and put custom code into any of the target OAF or forms, for example. So, and there's certain things that can change based upon how that user has data displayed to them, because it's based upon maybe different roles, where they're coming from, IP address, things like that. That allows it to become very dynamic. So it's not static. So based upon the conditions that change with that end user, that's how you can have the masking either displayed or not for that end user. There's also different types of masking that you may want to take advantage of, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail when we go into the demo on that. But the data masking rules are policy-based, leveraging those attributes. Those attributes is really what are going to make the dynamic protection work the way it does. So when we talk about a system-wide enforcement, it really is a one-to-many approach. So you can build in a simple rule set or a single rule set and allow that rule set to protect multiple different pieces of multiple different transactions where that data element happens to be populated within the application set. So you can quickly minimize your threat surface. When we're talking about the threat surface there, really that's the data minimalization. It's lowering how people are accessing your sensitive information, which is thus going to minimize your risk as an organization. It could be as simple as on-off prem. So if they're coming in from off of your network, mask data. If they're on their network, maybe they can see the data. So that's, you can easily adapt to changes because of the policies. So you don't have to reconfigure, you don't have to recode, you don't have to do things like that, but it allows you to protect your application very quickly and efficiently. So that dynamic protection is going to take into effect multiple different pieces of information. Could be attributes over the user and the roles that they have, for example. We're going to look at some of those pieces. We're also going to pair that with other information. So it could be as easy as their access contents. Where are they coming from? What IP address are they coming from? Are they on or off of our network? Could be the data attributes. What type of data are they working with? Is it sensitive data? Is it financial data? Is this data that we want to protect? And then also, what are your business rules? Because ultimately your business rules and policies and procedures need to be able to protect, they're designed to protect your ERP systems, your data, your policies, your procedures, your employees, everything. That's, what's going on in those. But how do you implement those and can really validate them working correctly inside of your ERP system? So what this does is it allows you to take a policy, something like people can't see sensitive information. They can't see social security numbers unless they have, XYZ, for example. That allows you to build that business rule inside of your EBS system without having to customize it and really invoke and bring that policy into effect in the real world scenario, rather than it just being, okay, well, we have, a procedure that sits out of the system and it, we really don't have any way to validate it or enforce it inside of EBS, for example. So that's a real challenge, but it allows you to bring in all of those different effects on the transaction and really depend upon the user. And when they work with it, it brings in that real world scenario, because there's going to be able, depending upon how they access it, because that context allows the policy engine to then implement the controls at the point in time of when they're needed and when they're needed. Maybe they're not needed all of the time, for example. So that's the advantage of that dynamic control, of being able to implement those policies at that attribute layer inside of the system. So how do we do this? We do this through a native integration. So we plug into the EBS app server, and what we have is inside of that plugin, it's going to take our policies and configuration that is also done within EBS. So we've got some custom forms to build the different rules and policies that you want to establish inside of your system, so you can implement the masking without having to customize your Oracle EBS system. It's also at the UI layer. You're not changing the data at the database layer. So what we're doing is we're protecting it in transit when it goes out to that end user. There's all sorts of other different tools to protect at the database layer. This is really working with the application set when somebody accesses information, putting in the controls at that particular point of whether or not they should or should not access that information. So, and then the nice part about this is all enforced in line. So you're not having additional hops from a network structure or any of those types of things. It's not going through a proxy server, that's trying to change up the data. This is all within your EBS system. So the controls are very tight from a performance perspective, as well as how the user accesses the system. So let's go ahead and I'm going to demo. So I am going to flip over here real quick. Let me start up a web session. All right. That's what I get for rebooting my Firefox right before this, is to get to go through and set up some of the additional controls. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to access an EBS system. I'm going to go ahead and do this via our single sign-on, to where we can bounce out and authenticate against a separate identity provider, rather than authenticating with the EBS user ID and password. So in this situation, I'm actually bouncing out to Microsoft ADFS for authentication. So I'm going to go ahead and click sign in with my user ID and password into ADFS, and it's going to bring me back to the page that I requested inside of EBS. So as I access this page, one of the things that we can do is go ahead and jump into a transaction, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and open up people, and I'm going to go into enter and maintain people. So the form, let me launch that real quick. Hold on just a second while that spins up. Yes, I want to run that. Remind me later. And let me pull that over to this window. So now I've got the ability to access information about the employee. So I'm going to go in and let's just grab employee number 1. I'm not going to go through and, go through a whole bunch of different people in this example. But when we start looking at it, what do you notice here? There's a couple of different fields and they're masked in a couple of different ways. So this comes down to the policy engine deciding how to mask this when I enter the transaction based upon those different controls or attributes that we're bringing into play here. So in this scenario, I've got the birth date that's masked out. I've also got the status that's going to be the marital status. And then I also have the social security masked out. You'll notice there's a difference between the two of them. One of them actually, with the date of birth, I can't do anything with. So I can't click on it. I can't jump into that field. I'm not going to be able to see that information. That's more of a static mask. And there's advantages and disadvantages to doing a static mask. One is it's going to mask out that data for, really the user using that page. They're not going to be able to pivot, look at it, do anything with it. It's just going to be masked out for them. There's a lot of reasons to do this, especially when you might be working with self-service information in an OAF form, which we can also do that as well. But there's also the other reasons why you might want to mask a different way. So if you'll look at the social security number or the status, if I click within this field, what you're going to notice is the data can be exposed. So by default, the information can be masked going into that transaction. But if the user needs to validate it, access that information, look at it, do anything like that, the data can then be exposed to that user at that particular point in time. So it's really a point in time, unmasking of the data. I can do the same thing with this example. The social security number is done the same way. And as I toggle between those, you can see the status goes off and it's now masked again as well. So it allows you to protect that data. If somebody takes a screenshot, for example, once they tab out of there, it's going to be immediately masked again. If somebody's screen surfing over their shoulder, trying to grab data, any of those scenarios, it's going to be protected as well. So there really is varying reasons of why you might want to do each one of these data masks. Keep in mind, this is done at our platform layer. It's not having to modify this page. We're going in and doing this through policies and controls, which I'll show you in just a second. The nice part about the toggling of it on and off is we kind of call that our click to view, because you click on the field to be able to expose that. Similar to what we do in other ERP applications, we've got the same type of functionality inside of PeopleSoft as well, for example. So this is where, going back to what I was saying earlier, we do this in other applications like SAP and PeopleSoft, and this is what we're bringing to bear in EBS as well. So when somebody does toggle that, we're going to be able to log that so that we know specifically, yes, that this field was viewed by a certain user, date, timestamp, all of those types of scenarios. So it's important to be able to understand that and know when that data was accessed, because that's the information that's required or needed for when you have those audits or different compliance regulations that come into place. You need to understand when and where somebody has accessed that information. So the nice part is you can do a static mask. So if you want nobody to be able to work with that data, or to view that data, sometimes people kind of call that a one-way mask of, once it's entered in, we're gonna go ahead and mask that data out. There's definitely points and times when you want to do that, but there's also additional times where you want to do the click to view and be able to toggle that information on and off. So there are reasons for both, and we see a lot of both of them implemented, especially across, say like our PeopleSoft systems from that perspective. So let's take a look at, I know Stephanie said this session was going to be about 45 minutes or so, and it's probably going to be right about that, but let's go ahead and look at how we can configure this. So I'm going to go back over here real quick, and I am going to minimize that. I'm going to go into the system administrator, and I'm going to go ahead and start up Appsian security. I'm going to go ahead and open up the policy set. I'll go ahead and spin up that form because yes, I want to access that form. So you can see now that we can look at the different policy sets. I'm going to close this out for just a second and then I'll come back in. But when we've got the ability from under the menu structure, what we have just from an organizational flow to where you can understand how all of these things attach to each other, for example, we start with, we have settings. And under the settings, for example, it's going to tell us which policy set is currently active. You can also reload that policy set as well. So the policy set consists of policies, and the policies are actually made up of conditions and actions. So if I were to open up a individual policy, for example, let me grab one of these. Let's just do run, and I'll grab the first one. So we can look at a activity. So this is our user log. So it becomes very simple in this situation. So we're going to go ahead, and the condition is a web URL condition, and then the security action down below is going to fire. So the conditions all have to be true for the security action down below to fire. In this situation, it's just going to be the activity log that is the security action. So when that's true, it's going to go ahead and write out that log file for us at that particular moment in time. So that's how all of these things tie together. So when we look at, for example, I'm going to go in and grab one of, our single sign-on, I happen to sign in with ADFS. So here's an example of some of the conditions that we're looking for. And then on the back end, when all of those are true, it's going to invoke that SAML2 authentication into the application set. So that's how all of those pieces tie together. And so I'm going to go ahead and look for the click to view of the mask. So what we're looking for here is a certain form name. And once we find that condition, we can then allow certain actions to take place. So you can see that there's two actions here. One is the marital status, and the other one is the national identifier. So if you remember when I was on that form earlier, this is exactly what was happening. So based upon that form, we're looking for two different fields, and then we're going to invoke our click to view action. So that implements that toggling of the data for you automatically with that particular data element. So you can see it's very easy. You're not having to customize any of your EBS to be able to do it. This is all performed and done at the application layer through our plugin. So you're not going in and making code changes to EBS on that form to be able to do that. We've also got one. I was just going to show you, so like an OAF mask as well. So same type of scenario there when we're looking for an OAF mask of GL, we can go in and do a static mask option. That's one of the differences between, say, the click to view and the static mask is obviously they're going to be a different action type, and there's going to be different conditions that you would do in there as well. Maybe you want to do that based upon IP address. Maybe you want to do it based upon what somebody's roles are. So by default, all of these roles data will have a static mask. Other roles, we're going to allow them to work with the data on a click to view. That's how you end up using some of those conditions to decide how you want to protect that data in line with the system, if that makes sense. So there's just a real brief demo of implementing that click to view and the static masking inside of the forms and how that setup is actually done inside of the system. So that policy engine is going to sit in EBS. You're going to be able to create the policies that consist of the conditions and actions, and you apply that on the policy set. And then that will be invoked as the users are working with the system. So with that, I'm going to flip back to PowerPoint here real quick. And really, excuse me, this is really one component to a larger platform. I know earlier when we talked about Appsian joining the Pathlock group, for example, what we now have, we talked about really this lower section, the data security right here, where we've got attribute-based access controls and data masking. So that's what we went in and showed you. When we talk governance, risk, and compliance over here on the upper, right-hand side, for example, that's where we can actually bring to bear SOD violations, user access provisioning and deprovisioning. We can do user access reviews. What type of permissions and authorizations do they have in EBS? Should they have these? How often are you doing those? We can completely automate that process for you as well. And then we also have over on the identity and access management side tie into single sign-on, which you got a brief demo of as well because of the way that I logged into the EBS system. So as you can see, this is really one small part of a large solution that we can provide for your EBS system and what we're able to bring to bear. So, data masking is just an integral part of the total solution. Additionally, you can see that this was native to your ERP system, so it allows you to have a rapid implementation. The configuration is all at the policy engine, so you're not having to customize your system. Obviously, there's going to be an install and configuration session that needs to take place, but from a performance perspective, you saw how quickly the forms came up, and toggling out of all of the in and out of those two different fields with the click to view, there wasn't any sort of performance impact. So it's really going to streamline your maintenance and updates that you're having to apply to the system because you're not making core changes to your EBS system to be able to protect this data. So with that, from a wrap-up perspective, remember this is about focusing on your data. It's about changing the mindset of what's important to the organization. You've really got to worry about what data your employees are working with. Should they have access to the data? When should they have access to the data? How should they work with all of that data? And also, what data do we collect that might increase our carrying costs, especially when you start joining that and marrying it with the compliance requirements that are possible and required for all of the different data that's being accessed inside of your system. So there's going to be a reduced cost of audits and maintaining compliance because of the solutions that Pathlock can bring to bear. And really, it's an integrated data protection into the business process. As you saw, we can tie directly into the flow and what that process is happening inside of the EBS system, and we can protect the data right then and there at that transactional layer. So it's going to help satisfy a lot of the requirements for data security inside of your organization. So maybe it's the fact of being able to protect that data with the data mask. It could be a static, could be the click to view, and all of that really helps with minimizing your data exposure. And what that does is it reduces your risks. It reduces your risk footprint because you're protecting the data that people have access into those systems. And it also helps you become a very proactive organization rather than reactive. It's often, it's always harder to respond to a threat when you don't have the correct things in place before the threat occurs. So implementing data security and logging of transactions and things like that are going to help you understand understand what is going on and happening inside of your system, as well as implementing some of the additional controls like user access reviews and SODs and those types of things, all bring down your risks while giving you additional controls to help satisfy what's required for your organization. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up for questions. So as I do that, though, I'm going to throw it back to Stephanie so she can talk about any upcoming events.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, again, if you have any questions, please add them now into the question box. So we do have we have a couple upcoming webinars, but one of note is we have our Pathlock Innovation Series coming up December 5th through the 8th. And that will be a series of webinar events from December 5th through the 8th with some partners and other companies that will be presenting on everything from SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, all kinds of solutions. So if you would like to attend that, please go, you can sign up on our email list. We'll have emails going out about it. And then also you can go find the information to register for that on our LinkedIn Pathlock page. It looks like we have a question here. So does it support all EBS versions?
That is a really good question, and I actually should have mentioned that while I was on the session. So whoever asked that question, thanks a lot, because I should have pointed that out. We do work with the 12.2.x platform. So if you're on a release prior to that, we have not backported it to anything prior to 12.2 yet.
Okay, great. And then the next question is, does the plugin access the log and log the data?
Yes, the plugin does log the data. So we can produce logs to track what the users are doing inside of the system.
Okay, great. I think that's all the questions we have for today. So I just wanted to say thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at future webinar events.